This week, we welcome Darren Shou, RSA Conference's Chief Strategy Officer, to discuss CISO liability. In our second segment, we'll cover this week's leadership and communications articles. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly. Panoptica, Cisco's cloud application security solution, provides end-to-end lifecycle protection for cloud-native application environments. It empowers organizations to safeguard their APIs, serverless functions, containers, and Kubernetes environments. Panoptica ensures comprehensive cloud security, compliance, and monitoring at scale, offering deep visibility, contextual risk assessments, and actionable remediation insights for all your cloud assets. Get more information at securityweekly.com/Panoptica. Your customers' and employees' identities are your responsibility to keep safe. But who is helping you stay safe from identity-based threats? Identity is the key to getting security right. And with the right identity partner, so much more is possible for your business than you thought. From strengthening cybersecurity, to increasing revenue, to reducing inefficiencies and costs, Okta unlocks growth and new possibilities for its customers. Go to securityweekly.com/Okta to learn more about Okta and the company's commitment to leading the fight against identity attacks. ThreatLocker implements a least privileged approach to cybersecurity, blocking every executable unless specifically authorized by your team. This methodology mitigates ransomware, supply chain attacks, and zero-day exploits, and ensures 24/7, 365 protection for your organization. To learn more about how ThreatLocker can help prevent known and unknown threats in your digital environment, safeguard your data and operations from threat actors, and align your organization with respected compliance frameworks, visit securityweekly.com/ThreatLocker.
Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode 362, recorded August 26, 2024. I'm Adrian Sanabria, not Matt Alderman, so I am your guest host this week. And joining me today is Mr. Jason Albuquerque. How you doing, Jason?
How we doing, Adrian? Good to see you on the show. We're about to have some thunderstorms here in southern New England, but if Matt were on the show today, we'd be talking NFL and about how the season's about to kick off.
Yeah,
So, I'm looking forward to the NFL season.
I was listening to one of my favorite Formula One podcasts, and they were talking about how complicated it is to watch certain sports. And like for Formula One, $10 a month. If you pay annually, it comes out to like $7 or $8 a month. Just one subscription, one app. You watch everything in one place. All the content's in one place. And they were describing the process you have to go through for NFL. Apparently, Netflix is going to have some exclusives. Peacock is going to.
It's absolutely insane. It's absolutely insane. I mean, you'll have football games on your normal everyday channels, your local channels, and then Peacock has some special games. Amazon Prime has some special games. So it's very complicated.
So you get to research before each game. You're like, oh, all right, what are we
Where's
firing
my team
up?
playing today?
Yeah. Do I have a subscription to that? Oh crap! I need to go get one. All right, we have also got with us Mr. Ben Carr. How you doing, Ben?
Good, Adrian. How you doing today?
I'm doing great.
It's I'm listening to the comment about the subscription services there, and I'm not a fan myself. It's going to be pretty soon. You're going to have a subscription to everything out there to be able to watch anything. Pretty frustrating.
Yeah. I added up all my subscriptions the other day because me and my partner, we've been dating for a little over a year now. And we've got to that point where we're like, okay,
subscription merge. Now you're thinking about, wow,
yeah, subscription merge.
Subscription merge.
This is part of a relationship right now.
There. Whose Netflix do we want? Well, I use my Amazon more. Yeah, I like it.
And yeah, I'm definitely paying more than I used to pay for cable TV back in the day, but then that also included a bunch of stuff I didn't have back in the day, like Spotify.
Yeah. Been pretty crazy.
All right, let's jump into it. So, our topic for today is the changing risk landscape with regards to CISO liability. Darren Shou is the Chief Strategy Officer at RSA Conference, as I mentioned in the intro. Prior to RSAC, Darren was CTO at Gen Digital, which used to be Norton LifeLock. And prior to that, he spent 2 decades in product development and leadership roles at Symantec and Microsoft. He has some very interesting stories on Wired, which I enjoyed checking out when I was prepping for the show. Some good stuff there, and has been featured in a lot of major media outlets. Darren, welcome to Business Security Weekly.
Really happy to be here, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that's, I mean, it shows up on my show too, right? My show is more general audience than Business Security Weekly. Enterprise Security Weekly covers everything. And still, like, we have not been able to avoid this topic. I've got a bunch of friends who are CISOs. It's a topic that constantly comes up on the back channel Slacks that we're all part of. And it's just amazing to me the amount of due diligence and the amount of redlining and lawyering and work you have to do just to get a role as a CISO. And as quickly as CISOs turn over, I think it's better now than it used to be. Still, it just seems madness to me. All the extra insurance you have to get, all the things CISOs have to do. I imagine a lot of folks are wondering, is it worth it?
It's interesting you mention that because I always wonder why now? Why is this really something we're very much attuned to? And I think the answer is cybersecurity is at a boiling point and it's spilled over into everything else. What I mean,
Ransomware probably played a part.
yeah, I mean, I was thinking about it. My wife is a physician at a hospital, and I knew things had turned the day she came home and said, I can't go to work today. Why? Nothing can get done in the hospital. She's in the emergency room, by the way. Nothing can get done today because the hospital system is down. What does that mean? I can't order meds. I can't prescribe things. I can't look up patients' records. That's huge. I think what it means is people are feeling it emotionally more than just reading it in the headlines of everyday news.
Well, it's impacting them personally, right? Like, if you think about Change, so the stats on Change healthcare incident was 1 in 3 people in the United States, which that's a big number, was impacted directly by the Change healthcare incident. So when that stuff starts to happen, when CDK Global that happens, a couple months later, and a bunch of people get impacted trying to purchase a car, it starts to be kind of part of your everyday vernacular, right? Where I think 15, 20 years ago, like nobody talked about security, right? I mean, look, 5 to 10 years ago, trying to explain to people like what you did because you were a CISO, like took a little explaining, right? And now it's like you say you're a CISO and the plumber's like, oh yeah, who do you work for? Like, what do you do? What are you finding, interesting in the threat world today? And you're like, my plumber? Like, so yeah, I mean,
well, to your point, Ben, it's impacting revenue and it's impacting customer satisfaction. Mm-hmm. So Business Security Weekly, let's speak the language of the business, right? It is impacting revenue and it's impacting customer sat. Guess what? Board of directors open their eyes.
And Jason, to that point, it's impacting your revenue. It's impacting someone else's revenue. And so like Ben said, exactly. It's impacting the end user who can't somehow get gas or get their car fixed or buy a car or go in for an operation, but it's also impacting the board of your company, the board of every other company, and importantly, the investors of those companies who are exactly the same people looking to get gas, buy a car, and go to the hospital. It's affecting everybody in every role.
Some of it speaks to, you mentioned your wife is a doctor and they can't, and in the ER, right? And you would think, look, I've cut my arm off. I need to get some help. Sorry, we have ransomware. You're going to have to hold on to that, right? Like there's something to be said for. I remember back in like just getting out of college, I went to Pittsburgh, visit a buddy of mine, and I went into, I think it was like an Arby's or a Burger King or something. And it was the first time I'd ever like been able to pay for the meal with the credit card, right? And now we're at the point where if the credit card machine goes down, there was this like window where they could still pull out the paper and run the slider, right? And I showed my kids that the other day and they're like, what is that? And I'm like, that's how we used to run cards, right? And like you'd use the carbon paper multiple times. Like we've lost resiliency, right? Like part of the triad, right? Availability, integrity, confidentiality. Like we've lost the whole availability of like, yeah, shit, electronics are down. We can still do this and get back up, right? Like, do you agree? Like I mean, I know it's not sexy, but like resiliency doesn't exist in a way anymore.
So Ben, it brings up a point. So clearly she did not get to stay home from work. She had to go there and they had to do paper. But then you have to be aware as the practitioner that there are regulations about that paper. So
Yeah.
HIPAA, for
Mhm.
example, you would not want to go ahead
Yes.
and write
Yeah.
down everybody's personal information and medications. You now have to think about resiliency, backups, and the new regulations of those backups. But to your point, I was recently in Japan, maybe a couple weeks ago, and it was a particular Thursday that I was flying out to Tokyo. And you know what happened that day? Planes weren't taking off. All sorts of things were. My plane fortunately took off right before everything shut down, and some other friends that were meeting me there did not make it there for 2 days. But here's what's interesting to your credit card story. When I got there late at night and I was checking into my hotel, the credit card wasn't working. Kept on like, geez, is it declined? Did I not call the bank? No, there's a third party fraud provider that was
Yeah.
impacted by that. Fortunately, in Tokyo at the hotel, I've got my whole family with me. It's like 11 o'clock at night. They're just like, look, we'll sort it out in 2 days. It's okay. Thank goodness for that.
And maybe we're in this kind of in between phase where we've gone digital with everything, and now we're learning what kind of stuff we have to do for resiliency there. Like when Delta CEO was on some talk shows talking about the outage, he just casually drops that they had 40,000 Windows servers that, yeah, all with BitLocker, that had to be manually remediated. And I remember thinking, what are you doing with 40,000 Windows servers? How many of those should be containers in 2024? And Delta's kind of famously got a lot of tech debt. It spills out into the media sometimes, and I think they're more on the laggard side of some things. And I think other businesses would have fared better in terms of resiliency, but and I think we have some better options now for resiliency as well. But healthcare is a great example here, because when Mark Andreessen said software is going to eat the world, and he revisited that a decade later, he said, I was right, except for healthcare, and partially because of all that regulation, they're probably the best prepared to go back to paper when compared to anyone else, I would say.
Yeah. And Adrian, just to kind of tie it all together, from my point of view, this is what I meant by it's hitting the boiling point. It's affecting how we move each other around the world, how we gather together, how we go to work, how we get, diseases treated and get emergency help. And what I think is happening and why we're all talking about why CISOs are so attuned to this liability issue is because everybody wants to put a face to the problem. What do? Do you put the face to a nation state in charge of ransomware? Do you put it on the face of someone who you can't see their face? What is it? And what I think it comes down to is the most public face right now is the role of a CISO, a CTO, a CIO, or a CEO. That's who they're looking at.
Hey, we wanted a seat at the table.
You got a seat at the table.
Boy, look at where that we wanted a seat at a table, not in a cauldron filled with boiling oil.
And not only that, but it
Right.
coincides, I think, with a profession getting a seat at the table after the 2015 Yates memo. The Yates memo followed the 2008 financial crisis. And what it did is it talked about individual accountability, right? So I think, again, what happened in
Yeah.
finance in 2008? People were pretty upset. Nobody went to jail. Nobody got held accountable in their minds in the mass media for a meltdown of the financials, right? So 2015, they published a memo on individual accountability for corporations. And I think this just coincided with what's happening for CISOs. Unfortunately, in some
Yeah, weirdly
cases.
enough, the blame is kind of focused on the CISO though, right? Like where in essence, like there is a part of that blame that could be there, right? If there's malfeasance or you're not doing your job right. but there's also this texture of the blame that's on the board and the CEO, right? And I would say the rest of the staff, but it really tracks back up to the CEO if they're not actually pushing out the right mentality and taking what the CISO says and saying, okay, well, we've got to kind of do this. I mean, I don't know. Have you guys ever sat in a boardroom or the 3-person meeting with the CEO and the legal person, and the legal guy makes a recommendation and the CEO goes, "Yeah, no, we're not doing that. Like that's just stupid. Like get out of here. Like we don't have the money for that." Like that never happens, right? But it's par for the course when the CISO says, "Hey, we've got to do something. We have risk and liability and exposure here. Yeah, we don't have investment for that. You're gonna have to figure out how to do it." So I think there's this shared responsibility model that I really haven't seen it track back yet, right? They've come after, Joe Sullivan had some issues, right? We've seen the issues with SolarWinds, right? Tim Brown, but we haven't really seen the exposure of somebody coming back, which I think will be the tipping point of a lot more change when a CEO comes under the gun for that. And I think we partially saw a little bit of that with the Change Healthcare thing, right? Where the the letter from the senator coming out and saying that they hired somebody who didn't really have the right level of experience for that role, and it really didn't track to him; it tracked to the CEO. But your thoughts on that, Darren, from a liability standpoint?
Look, a couple things there. One is you don't want to be standing alone in the storm, right? No matter what your role is, I don't think you want to be the only one in the room. And you mentioned it. Who's in that room? You got the CEO, you got general counsel, you got yourself. Hopefully you have the CFO in the room. Why? Because CFOs are another profession that have gone through this in corporate America. Every profession has, but the CFO starting in 1929, what happened in 35, 36? SEC gets created in response to the Great Depression. And all of a sudden you get these forms like 8K, materiality on finance. All these things have flowed all the way through up 100 years later for the same thing here. But what did CFOs do? What have general counsel done? To your point, Ben, they looked at risk, right?
Yeah.
And I think that the whole thing is not a binary answer to your point. It's all about a continuum of risk. And they learn to speak the language, whether you're in general counsel or you're finance. And that language of risk, as I understand it, and what I've had my experience in the boardroom is 3 things. You can accept the risk, you can transfer the risk, or you can mitigate the risk, or some combination of those. And the language of risk, the metric of that is not feet, yards, meters, or furlongs. It's all dollars. You need to talk in the
It's not
language of it.
vulnerabilities or packets or
Patch
firewall
management.
blocks.
It's not how many phishing emails
Right.
you've blocked, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you've watched the show, one of the things I've always touted is a CISO's best friend is the CFO.
Yeah.
Quite a while back, when I was a practicing CISO, I walked into the CFO's office and we went through your typical technology-based risk analysis, right? Where you have critical, high, low, or red, green, yellow. And I had the CFO pull me aside and say, listen, this is not how we manage risk in this company. Let me teach you something, right? What are the things that we can be learning from these CFOs or these other executives, maybe chief risk officers? What can CISOs be learning? How can they better integrate with executives who've been there, done that?
100%.
Right? One of the things, I was lucky enough to have someone say to me, come here, kid, I'm going to teach you something, right? But that doesn't always happen. What can CISOs be doing to get that knowledge share from these executives who have been there, done that?
Jason, I'd love to
What?
dive in on that. Or sorry, Adrian, go ahead.
I just wanted to throw in there for context that we have seen it happen at least once that I'm aware of, where Drizzle CEO was personally sanctioned by the FTC. For the next 20 years, he's got special rules following him around if he's in the C-suite of a company.
And Adrian, I believe that action was taken retrospectively too.
Yeah.
Based on event date versus report date. And I believe he might have even had some kind of change in role by the time that. So it was interesting.
Well, Uber acquired the company while all that was going on, and they just recently announced they're shutting it down. So
I'd like to go in on Jason's point again. I had a similar story. One of my neighbors happens to be a CEO of a credit union and is well versed in financial language, right? I'm pretty sure he was talking to me about a whole bunch of things not related to business. I'm pretty sure I heard dollar, dollar, dollar. And I was very curious about it. This is many years ago. And I reached out to him. I said, look, I've got to learn how to speak this language. What books do you recommend? And he gave me a list of a few books, and they'd be the ones that you would expect. And then I started looking at courses online, and there are courses out there that are titled things like Finances for Non-Financial Executives. And some of them are fantastic. And then I started sitting down personally. This is many years ago, thinking about, how do I read a balance sheet? How do I read a 10K? How do I write a 10K? Because a lot of what we're talking about here is table setting. You need to be able to go into that risk and disclosure section and adequately put that in there. In fact, I once heard that described as, think of everything that could go wrong in the world and then try to figure out how you would communicate that in financial terms.
No, that's beautiful. And that's where I would say CISOs need to start sharpening the knife.
Yeah. Or sharpen the pencil.
Start getting that engagement. Sharpen the pencil, right? Absolutely. But start getting that engagement with CFOs and chief risk officers and CEOs, and having the non-technology conversation, having the conversations around how it's going to affect the P&L, right? Having conversations around how it's going to affect customer satisfaction or revenue. I think it was the last show, the show before, to show that the security team can help move the business forward. I actually tagged every Salesforce opportunity from my team that we engaged in. Everything. Anytime we could move the needle, if we had to get on a vendor risk call, if we had to talk to their CISO, if we had to talk to their chief risk officer, every time we tagged opportunities with security, to the point where we were helping generate $14 million a quarter of revenue for the company that we were tagged to, that we had some level of influence on. So we were able to go in and say, here's our value to this organization because we're helping influence this sale. How can we get better engaged? How can we learn more about the business? How can we learn more about risk? How the CFO views risk, how the CEO views risk, and get that knowledge share.
And another benefit of that is, once you're all speaking the same language, talking about this topic of risk, you've actually pulled more people into the tent. And so now you're having these conversations, you have allies, you've built coalitions, and that's going to help you pre-event, during event, and post-event to have those clear lines of communication and responsibilities all in the same language, right? So for example, what does that mean? Look at something like, what is material? Well, it's going to be defined obviously in financial terms most of the time. What is that? Is it 0.5% or 5% of total assets? Can you track an incident to that? Could you pre-game that and say, how would I calculate that? And then later, how would I substantiate that under retrospective review? I think that's a good tabletop exercise. That's why I thought it was sharpen the pencil.
Yeah. 100%.
Right?
And
That's right.
I think in general, that's kind of lacking for a lot of security organizations. Something I've spent a lot of time doing is, how do you acquire products? How do you buy products? How do you determine if one of your 75 security products is not producing value for the organization? How do you measure value for each of those 75 products? How do you know which ones are just shelfware, or maybe I like to call them busy work generators. Like, they make people look like they're doing security stuff, but they're not actually doing security stuff. And a lot of this just comes back to that financial mindset of, what does value mean? How do I know if I'm upside down on a security investment? And so I think it helps you in other areas as well, being able to speak.
Oh, and Adrian, you want to know what that does? That helps build trust throughout the rest of the organization. There's nothing better for a CFO to see a security leader come in and say, you want to know what? I think I can consolidate and I can reduce risk at the same time.
Yeah.
Right. And show that you're actually looking out for the business from a financial perspective. That's going to build trust with CFOs. That's going to build trust with CEOs to know it's not just about the shiny tool or the blinky light. It's about truly being a business professional who's looking out for the business, where we can consolidate platforms, save money, reduce risk. It's having that level of conversation.
Right. It's speaking in the same language you just said, Jason. It's capital allocation. How are we dedicating human capital, financial capital, where is our energy and attention, and how is it benefiting the organization? But one other thing you said really caught my ear too, which is you got to calibrate with your peers, not just inside your work group, but outside. So this tent's got to include so many more people. The tent is now the village, right? And you're going to calibrate with other CISOs and CIOs and CTOs, and you're going to talk about, hey, how is this product working in your environment? How are our environments different or similar? Hey, this one thing is not giving me a lot of signal, but I heard that in a really terrible storm, it's very useful. It's that use once or break glass if emergency.
Mhm.
How much value does that deliver you? How do you communicate that to your CFO and your board? Does the board understand when you do that, that this is a vitamin and not a painkiller? I was sitting at our RSA Conference 2024 last year, and what I saw is most CISOs very attuned to this problem of personal liability. And guess what I saw them doing? Getting together in a room, mostly like a birds of a feather session, and just sharing very privately, what are you doing? Here's what I'm doing. What are
Yeah.
you doing? How can we calibrate? How do you keep that calibration going year round? I think that's super important to solve.
Yeah, and we see a lot of efforts to do that. Like CRA has collaboration forums, CISO collaboration
Mhm.
forums. Where um, very much that where what is the rule? I'm blanking on the Chatham House rule,
Oh, yeah.
right? Where all you're doing is you're giving them the opportunity, giving them the place to do it, and maybe providing some of the topics, some of the just the seeds to get them kicked off. And I've done a lot of that work, and it's amazing. Like when I used to train sales folks, I used to tell them that CISOs need therapy and they're not getting it, so just let them talk,
Right.
just just get them talking and just listen. Don't be selling stuff to them hard. You'll learn so much if you just let them talk. They need to talk, and just listen.
And they're going to share stories that are going to be educational. That's how every other profession has done it. I was trying to understand once when I was CTO at a prior employer what my particular liability was and what my coverage was. Where do you start? I remember, and the reason it had happened is I'd landed in London for our sales. I was helping out pre-sales, Jason, like you were talking about. And I was reading the Financial Times, trying to understand my language and exercise my financial, fluency. And on the front page was just a whole bunch of things, not about cybersecurity, but about other industry professionals being held to account on personal
Mm.
liability. And I remember the first thing I did is I called up my company, my GC, and I said, I need to better understand my D&O coverage. Am I covered? Standard
Yeah.
result. You get like paper that you could print it out this thick. Okay, great. I'll read that in my spare time tonight. Read. Oh, goodness. It's in a different language, the language that lawyers and insurers speak. Okay. How do
Yeah.
I understand which part, side A, side B, am I covered or not? Have you guys experienced that too?
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
So
And do I see my name in there? Right. Okay. Am I an
You likely
officer
know.
of the company?
Is my role
Yeah.
at least listed in there?
It's like a giant if else statement. If someone is officer of the company, then covered. If not covered, see section. And you have to
Yeah.
follow that
Yeah.
whole
yeah,
logic
Yeah.
down.
Look, I've run that to ground, and like sometimes the answer you get back is, "Oh, of course you're covered. You're an employee." Like, no, you're not. You're not covered by D&O just
yeah,
because you're an employee. Like,
Right.
it's not how D&O works, and it's surprising how some people at the company who you would think should understand D&O insurance don't understand that and give you that answer and think that that's okay.
D&O is now a must.
Yeah.
yeah. Something as basic. I was in a car accident. Why I was a PCI QSA. I was going on site to do an audit, and this is forever ago. This is back in 2010, 2009, something like that. And yeah, got into an accident on the job, leaving a fast food restaurant, that we were doing PCI work for, and found that because I was there for work, I was driving for work, and you know rented a car for it. My personal auto insurance didn't cover me. Uh, and like the Amex, I think covered some of the damages to the rental car because I used an Amex card, but that was it. I had no coverage. My business didn't have any coverage on me, and they ended up covering it.
Don't buy car insurance on the rental, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
Right.
yeah, look, I mean, it's frustrating that like as a CISO, you've got to be an expert in a ton of different disciplines and really, like you said, speak the
yeah.
language of the business, both from a financial and legal aspect to know like when you need to add value to that conversation because you'll hear a lot of stuff that isn't accurate. And if you don't have the knowledge to be able to navigate that, you can find yourself either from a business or personal side in trouble pretty quickly.
Oh, big time. And Ben, you want to know what? Going into 2025, the pressures are mounting. They're not getting easier.
Yeah.
It's getting harder
So
from a legal perspective, a regulatory perspective. And guess what? The economy is an issue and it's going to continue to be
And
an
I've
issue
heard
in
people come out and
2025.
say,
So
"Oh,
budgets.
Tim Brown got off on the SEC thing, like so it's not a big deal." Like, no, 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 that's not the readout on that.
Ben, one of the things I hear from that is people talk about, and I'm misusing the term, but forgive me, you've got to, as a CISO, build out your legal firewall. I'm not talking the one about bits and bytes. How are you
Yeah.
fortifying your position? Right. And
Well, it's the weird conversation. So we talk about, a lot of people have talked about DNO, and it's in the, I think, the common vernacular for a lot of CISOs now when they're talking about a new role, right? But one of the things that I guess isn't necessarily there, but it's like personal liability coverage, right?
Mhm.
And having someone who's potentially on retainer for you. So when you're in that conversation, because again, you would think everybody would understand it, and I'm not anybody who does. I'm not talking down to the rest of the audience here, but there are a lot of people who don't understand that the role of corporate HR and the role of a corporate lawyer is to protect the corporation, not the
yeah,
individuals,
not the
right?
employees.
And so your thought going in is, hey, I'm going to ask my corporate lawyer this question, and he's going to give me an answer. He's going to give you the answer that protects the company. You may also need to ask somebody who has your personal best interests in mind. And if you don't have that person on speed dial when shit hits the fan,
Yeah,
it's not the time to go looking for them, right? And so I think this is going to be a big thing. And then who covers that cost, right? Is that something that you account for in a raise in the salary request or requirements that you have? Is it, something that the company reimburses you for fees? This is groundwork which hasn't been really covered, and I think it's going to get super complex. To your point, Jason, 2025 and beyond is almost like a minefield. It's not well understood. Where if you're a CFO or a chief legal, like when you come in, it's pretty well defined groundwork, and everybody knows what the playing field looks like. But you could walk into a company where they're just like, "What are you talking about? Like liability coverage and DNO? Like, why would we even think about that for a CISO?" There's a lot of people that aren't up to speed on what the new world order looks like.
Right.
well,
But in that same breath, they'll be the first to point at you when
A
there's an
hundred
issue,
percent.
right? So that's the dichotomy of
Yeah.
it.
and I think that brings me to the question I want to wrap on here. And I think we've kind of danced around it. Is we've got different kinds of CISOs that we need now, and I've heard from a lot of CISO friends like I'm never going back to a public company again because they felt like they didn't really get to work on security anymore. It was all regulatory compliance paperwork and stuff that they really didn't have any interest in. And they wanted that seat at the table, so that they could have an impact on security, and then they just end up doing SEC paperwork. So I wonder how much do you see that, like is that I imagine that should probably be one of the key considerations, like what kind of CISO do I want to be in terms of like what kind of company am I going to be a CISO for?
Yeah. And Adrian, a couple of things on that. One is, even if you want to get out of a public company, let's say you're at a private company. What is the exit for the private company? IPO. What are you doing pre-IPO?
Right.
Get ready for all that scrutiny and regulatory things. So
Yeah.
you're not going to escape it. You might shift it in time, but that responsibility, look, bottom line, these new rules, this new scrutiny is going to test all of us, CIOs, CISOs, CTOs. It's going to test us in our ability to coordinate disparate groups, finance, business, legal, risk teams. And it's going to be up to us as a role to basically harness that combined knowledge, speak the same language, and best fortify our positions so we can protect the company, but also protect ourselves. To answer Ben's question from earlier, how do you know if they're going to advocate for you? You pay for it. I was buying a car the other day. The moment I bought the car and drove off the lot, I had a question. I called back. I'm not getting the same answers. The person who is selling me is not always the one who's going to give me the right answers. And you just got to think about that. Who do I go to? I find a mechanic. Who's paying for that mechanic? I am. So that's how I know I'm going to get that. Now, you get to this point, though, of, okay, so what do we do? I still think it comes down to, if you want to protect your company, you want to protect yourself, it's going to take a village. If we all help each other, lift each other, share with each other, we can do that. Other professions have done that to various degrees, and we need to learn from them.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Darren, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly today.
Thanks, everybody.
Stay tuned. When we come back, we've got some leadership and communications articles to discuss.